Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Diligence Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member Magazine. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the show, and we're filming today from the Conference Board Studios here in New York. And we have one of my favorite topics today, and it's the top challenges facing boards in 2019. And joining me, as she usually does for this show, is Paula Loop, who's a PwC partner and also the leader of PwC's Governance Insights Center. Welcome back, Paula.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this is one of our favorite shows, and the audience thinks so as well. It always has good exposure. So I'm sure you put some thought into this. And as usual, I'm going to let you go first, because you typically always take the topics that I was going to discuss, but I'm going to let you do that again. So what would be your first top strategic or governance issue that you think boards are going to be facing in 2019?
So I think I'd start out with a broad topic of culture, and not meaning to go down the road of, we've talked a lot about risk and reputational risk related to cultural issues at companies and so forth, but I'm going to step that back a little bit, go a little broader. There's not a company out there that I don't interact with that's not going through some kind of transformation these days, either a digital transformation, a sales transformation, a finance organization transformation, something along those lines. So where they really need all hands on deck, they need all the employees to buy into this transformational change, to ready themselves, to be agile, to be able to do things differently. And so I really think the board needs to expand their thinking around culture to not just focus on what are the risks associated with it, could we have a reputational problem and so forth, but to think more about, do we have the right culture here to embrace our strategy and really take it to the next level? So I'm going to stick with culture, I think, as my number one.
Well, when you think of culture from the board level, it's no secret that tone at the top is the key to that. And there are what I call watershed moments every year that, regardless of what the CEO says or the board says, certain actions will help dictate your culture. Whether it's how you treat people that commit fraud. I mean, there's watershed moments, and so that's...
Actions speak louder than words, they say.
It certainly does when creating the culture. And I think that boards will be wrestling with that all year because of the incidents that we've seen, whether it's Volkswagen or Wells Fargo or the things that seem to keep cropping up. So I would agree with you 100% on that. So my first one, which I don't think you're going to argue with either, is board composition, okay? So investors are still saying, without question, that they want the right people in the room. Okay, that's their biggest concern, is I want the right people in the room. It sounds simple, it's not simple. Diversity, as we know, was a big issue this year. We had State Street and the New York pension funds withholding or voting no against directors, where there weren't any women represented on the board. Other investors are joining with those actions going forward. That's a big issue. A huge issue for me, and I know you guys did a paper on it recently, is director succession. People think of CEO succession, director succession, because now you have to think about who's going to be your chairs of the future, and you can't waste the space, and you have to think about that on who you're bringing on. We have
ongoing planning is really important, I think, is what you're getting to, right? It's not just a wake up, we need a new director, right?
And it gets back to your digital transformation and that issue, because you have to have people that have some experience. Sometimes that's going to be age related. So I'm sure you won't argue with my first one, which is composition.
No, absolutely. And I think that's just an ongoing situation, but I think having boards really get their arms around it and thinking it all the way through is what's important, and not doing a reactive approach, but much more of a strategic approach to it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're on your second one.
Okay. So I think my second one is around ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues. And I guess my point here is I just think companies and boards are going to continue to hear more about it. It's definitely on the agenda for investors. And my take on it is I think boards and companies are doing more in this area than they are taking credit for, and maybe even they're recognizing themselves. Just because I think the definition of what's really a social issue and what are the risks of the company, and have you thought them through from an ESG perspective or not. So my suggestion or thought is that over this next year, we're going to hopefully get a little more clarity, and investors are going to get more clear about what they're looking for, but companies and boards are going to understand the concepts better and actually realize they've been doing some of this already, and maybe have to do a little bit more in that area, but we're going to come a little bit closer. The gap is going to subside a bit. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say ESG, because right now it is a little bit of a fiasco. I mean, everybody's trying to figure it out. Look at what your study, your annual research showed this year. I mean, directors are not embracing this like possibly they should be, okay? But maybe the most interesting I've heard recently is some of the institutional investors that want to take ESG, which has been sort of sandwiched together, and separate the letters, okay? Which to me makes perfect sense and might let you get around your arms around that, rather than everything being as one ESG. You know, you have governance, you can deal with the environmental and the sustainability part, and then you have your social part. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
No, I think a lot of the issue is around the definition. I think everybody's thinking about it a little bit differently, so we need to get some clarity there. I totally agree.
So my next one, you know, I was thinking hard about this, and I didn't know what to label it, okay? So I labeled it board leadership, just because I recognized that the need for that in this coming up. But what I wanted to talk about is sort of the disruptive times that I think 2019 is going to bring, which is going to mandate board leadership, okay? And one of the things that comes to my mind is Senator Warren's proposal, okay, where she wants 40% of the board elected by the employees, and she wants federal chartering and things like that. Now, again, I know that these initial shots across the bow don't necessarily always happen, but and I'm sure there's going to be a response from the U.S. Chamber and the Business Roundtable to some of this, but still, you know, the big New York law firms that I talk to, you know, they're at least mentally preparing for this, and I think, you know, if something like that happens, you know, we're really going to need to be ready, and that's a giant transformation, you know, from a boardroom level, committee chairs. I mean, the whole thing just, we'll have to see if that would shake out. I look at California, you know, passing the diversity legislation. Interestingly enough, silent on people of color, you know, or on age or anything, probably because of measurability, but still, I assume that that's going to be challenged as well on that. But there's a case that these boards that are being withheld against, you know, how they're ever getting in that, they must not have the right leadership, because you have to be living under a rock today if you aren't aware of what's coming down on that side. So anything to add in the world of disruptive or in board leadership?
Well, so frankly, I think you're a little cheating on our game, because yours is sort of a catch-all, right? So you've got lots of things in there. But I agree with you. There's a lot coming at boards and companies. I mean, between activist things that are coming up, right? And
cyber,
then
I forgot to mention.
Cyber, you've got, so there's a lot of different things coming at them, and that's why I think you're kind of cheating. But I think you're right. I think boards are going to have to be really agile, really on their toes over the next year or two to make sure they're paying attention to all this stuff. And honestly, with our annual corporate director survey that you mentioned, I think boards are listening. They are paying attention, but it's a lot. It's just a lot to throw at them. It's a lot on their plate. So,
well, I may be cheating you, but I'm not cheating the audience. So I'm actually going to give you an extra opportunity here to say what your third challenge will be for boards in 2019.
Terrific. So one of the things that we hear a lot about, and maybe it aligns a little bit with your second one, is just around the effectiveness of the board and the ability to get through all these things on their agenda and figure out how to spend time in the places they want to spend time and not have to spend too much time in the places they don't want to spend time. So we get called in quite a bit, my team, to focus on pre-read materials, agenda, making things more efficient. How can they manage their meetings better? How can they make better use of executive sessions, that sort of thing. So I think boards are going to continue to have to zero in on that because of the volume of things that are hitting them. And they really do want to spend time in important areas and can't get bogged down in things that they know are not important. They're not the most efficient and effective way to do things, but they're kind of stuck in some traditions. So I think that'll be something the boards will spend some time on over the next year, is continuing to think about how they can make their meetings and their time more effective.
Well, it makes perfect sense. And I would think that that also takes in the corporate secretary, because
Yep.
I think, which maybe we don't talk about enough, on how boards that are more effective have these resources that are helpful, particularly those that, when you only meet 4 times a year or whatever, there's a lot that is going to happen between meetings and whatever. So a good corporate secretary can really
Help manage that agenda.
Help that
Yep.
agenda. So, well, this again is my most fun time of the year because we get to do this. We like to go back and look. We don't ever do it on air, but we like to go back and look and see how bright we were with our projections. And we did good this year, just so you know that. But Paula, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us, and I look forward to other good shows in 2019.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms, brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.